Hello, welcome to another episode of Justice Now. My name is Joe Lewis, I'm your host. Today's show is going to be on grandparents' rights. And I brought on an expert today, a professional attorney in our area, Mr. Nathan Van Loon, who is going to discuss this issue with us today. Welcome to the show, Nathan.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay. Now, I'm going to grab my little cheat sheet here. I haven't, reached the level of expertise that you have, so I'm going to grab my little booklet here. And
well, I'm not an expert. I'm just an attorney, and I'll do the best that I can.
Okay, well, that's all we expect here, and that's all you can do. But we appreciate having you on the show.
Sure.
Before we get into some of the issues that most of the grandparents have involving their rights in the family court and to their grandchildren, why don't you tell the viewing audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a family law practitioner, and I have a law firm. Its name is Van Loon Menard, and what we do is we basically specialize in family law issues, be it divorce, be it child custody, child support. I've been a law guardian in the courts for about 8 or 9 years now. What I do on a daily basis is I'm always in court, and I've represented all sorts of folks, people who've got custodial problems, support problems, respondents on neglect matters. I've represented grandparents before. With regard to the attorney for the child issue, I've been a attorney for the child or a law guardian for hundreds of children over the years, and some of that work is the most rewarding work that I do. And quite frankly, I think that part of the problem that people have when they come to court is they don't exactly know what the rules of the game are.
Exactly.
They don't know what the court's reasonable expectations necessarily are.
Okay.
And so when they come to court without those sorts of things, they don't understand why things happen.
Right.
But basically, if you look at an issue such as grandparents' rights, the question is, for most people, visitation for grandparents is a relatively simple thing. You just talk to your children, and then you have visitation with your grandchildren.
Right.
So you stay out of court.
Right.
It's those tricky issues when the parents are either obstinate or angry or are under some sort of basically a disability with regard to handling their own children.
Right.
That grandparents and their rights come to court. In some of those circumstances, with regard to problems that the parents have, are unfortunately all too common problems that exist, and they could be drugs or alcohol, or that they've somehow abandoned the children, that they've got a child protective services history where they've been violent. Sometimes the people have been incarcerated and they're no longer able to care for the children. And in those situations, more than just visitation, the grandparents are either called upon to step up or they voluntarily step up, and they basically take over the day-to-day parenting role because the parents have taken themselves out of the game. And it's interesting to me that some of the best sort of people who come through the court system are the grandparents who are they don't have to do this. They already serve their time, so to speak,
right, exactly.
in that they've raised their children, and now they've got to solve these new problems at an age where they expected life to get maybe a lot easier.
Right.
So it takes a real sort of special person, a special grandparent, to really step up and try and solve some of these problems. And sometimes the courts can be very helpful, sometimes not as helpful. Sometimes the county can be helpful, sometimes not so helpful.
Right.
But I think for grandparents who come to court, what they need to do is have some sort of realistic expectations. They have to understand what the court is looking for them to do and what they want or are able to do.
Okay.
So,
and I think that is one of the issues, is that they don't understand what type of standing or grounds that they have to enforce whatever rights that they have. They have an expectation of what their rights are as grandparents, and it's looked upon in more of a humane fashion than more of a legal fashion. You know, I'm
Right.
the grandparents, you know, my role in my grandchild's life and that grandchild's role in my life is essential, and they expect more rights actually than
They may have.
they may have. Exactly.
Well, I think what everybody has to understand with regard to how the court system is set up is they look at the parents first. And they're not to be displaced without good cause. So it's not, if a grandparent wants to assert themselves, usually what has happened is that there has been some sort of circumstance where they're either knocked out of the children's lives and they want to be back in, or what they have is the parents have sort of lost control of the situation, and the grandparents are called in to help resolve the situation. And with grandparents' rights, say for example, you have a situation where the parents just don't want the grandparents involved anymore. There's been a falling out,
Right.
things like that.
Exactly.
If that particular grandparent has had no relationship with the grandchild at all, so they've been away for 5 years, they don't really know the child, they're not going anywhere
Exactly.
with their petition.
Right.
However, if you have a grandparent who is involved, who has been a part of the child's life traditionally, like a caregiver, maybe instead of daycare goes to grandma, grandpa's house, or some sort of situation where the child has always known grandpa or grandma and has always loved grandma or grandpa and is involved, then that person has what we call standing.
Right.
And then the next level is it in the best interest for that child
Exactly.
to have visitation with the grandparents?
Right.
So on a sort of a visitation aspect, that's where the standards are. And if it's in the best interest of the child, then typically what the courts do is they set aside some time. Now, not a ton of time, maybe not as much time as a grandparent may want, but what they want is to have that relationship continue to exist so that the child gets the benefit from it. Now, there may be strings attached, like you can't talk about your problems with your own kids,
Right.
so that the child, knows who's in charge, okay,
Right.
and that authority of the parents isn't subverted, okay.
Right. Right.
But that really comes into the judge's discretion or a settlement that's worked out between the parents and the grandparents with regard to how a visitation is going to go. I think what is maybe even more common, however, than just the grandparent asking for visitation is when they sort of get drafted.
Right.
The mothers or fathers fall into drugs.
Right.
They get incarcerated. They take themselves fundamentally out of the game. There have been some circumstances where I've been a lawyer on a case, and the parents know that the child would be better with the grandparent
Right.
until they get their life together or they go and have their fun or whatever.
Okay.
So what happens at that point is what should the grandparent do? Should they apply for guardianship? Should they apply for child custody? Should they seek out some other remedy? Should they try and get an agreement from their own children about the grandchild and where the residency is going to be? Because you got the big issues. If you're a grandparent who's a primary caretaker, you got the school issue.
Right.
You got the medical issues,
Right,
the dental
exactly.
issues,
Exactly.
maybe there's some mental health issues. Maybe you got all those issues that need to be resolved. Somebody needs to be in charge. And if the parent is not in the picture, the grandparent needs the authority to start making some calls. And either that comes through a custodial arrangement that's worked out between the parents and grandparent, or it comes through a guardianship arrangement that's mandated by the court. But there are certain steps in order to get custody as well. It's not an easy thing for a grandparent to go and achieve custody.
Okay,
No,
for
but-
starters, say
Sure.
if I'm a grandparent and my relationship isn't that good with my own children,
Right.
and it's interfering with my visitation with my grandchild,
Okay.
and say that I am one of these grandparents that have some sort of standings because I have a relationship with the grandchild. I've
Okay.
seen the grandchild. I've taken the grandchild to doctor's appointments. I've babysitted
Sure.
the grandchild at
Sure.
times. What would be the steps that I could take legally to
Okay.
go about getting this case into a court and setting up some type of visitation?
Well, I think in that circumstance, if you've got the relationship, so what you have to do in your petition or your pleadings or the things that you write down for court, what you have to do is you have to go line by line. This is the nature of my relationship. These are the things that I've done with the child. You got to go down the line. You've got to catalog it.
Right.
Okay? It can't just be, I love my grandkid.
Right.
That's not going to do it.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Of course you love your grandkid. Nobody's saying that you don't love your grandkid. What you have to do is you have to show the relationship between you and your grandchild. So you have to go down the line. Okay, these are the things that I do. He or that little grandkid comes over once a week until the big falling out. Okay? That we go to the museum, we go to the art gallery, we do these things. Sometimes we go to Seabreeze. You know, we take them to the Fireman's Carnival. Those sorts of indicators or indicia of a real relationship here, that is a real bond. The more of that sort of thing that you've got, the better. So if it's like I go to the school plays, I go to school functions, on these occasions I take the child to the doctor, the more of that you've got, the more the court can see or has the ability to perceive that there is a real relationship here, and that relationship should be preserved regardless of what the parents say.
All right.
Because as anybody knows, between parents and their parents, there may be issues going back decades, and they may not have resolved them, and they put aside their differences for a while, and then those differences come back up. But I think the thing that most grandparents have, more than maybe new parents, is the perspective, the long view, which certainly is a benefit when trying to explain your case.
Right.
The one thing that you can't do, or I don't think works, is to come off as angry grandpa or angry grandma.
Right. I was about to. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because if you come off like that, then what's going to happen is the court's going to look and say, and perhaps consider, that this grandparent is going to try and supersede this parent.
Authority. Right.
And they're not going to, that's not what the purpose of the visitation is supposed to be about.
Right.
So.
Okay. Now, drugs, alcohol, these sort of aspects that cause the parent to fall out the picture, and responsibilities fall on the grandparent. This is one of the biggest issues.
Right.
That usually comes to me, and that's because of the problem we have with drugs and the epidemic that drugs has caused in our society. I get a lot of calls from grandparents who have their grandkids at their home.
Sure.
They're not able to get anywhere in family court as far as getting any sort of legal documentation to say they have custody. And because of that, they're being told at places like social services when they need help, as far as getting medical coverage for the child, any type of financial assistance to help them out take care of the child, that they not eligible for that because they don't have any sort of legal documentation that, you know.
Yeah, Joe, there are a couple of ways that grandchildren come into the grandparents' care. A couple of ways that happens. Either the parents say, take care of my kids, please. Okay? I can't handle them right now, and there's no formal agreement. Well, in those circumstances, what that grandparent really needs to do is formalize these things as much as possible, which means ultimately getting a court order, which means perhaps doing things that are a little unpleasant and would strain the familial bond, so to speak, but it's necessary in order to get the job done. And what that would be is putting in a custody or a guardianship petition and explaining in detail what's been going on. And the longer that the child has actually been living with the grandparent in that particular situation, the better it is for the petition. I mean, if a mother or a father just says, take the kids, I can't handle them right now, they know something, and the court's going to look at that and they're going to say, this person obviously can't handle it. At least they should. And they're going to the courts are going to try and give these parents lots of chances to get their act together so that they can be responsible parents. But when you're putting your petition together as a grandparent for the custody of the grandchildren, what you have to do is you have to say, okay, I've got to get over a burden called extraordinary circumstances. Okay, it's not like the same standard that exists between a mom and a dad. That's straight line best interest. Who's the better parent?
Right.
What you have to do is fundamentally say and prove that the parents, both of them, are out of the picture, one, or if they're in the picture, they are incapable of handling the day-to-day functioning of parenting a child.
Okay.
And sometimes what happens is that those parents know that and will sign an agreement to that effect, giving the grandparent charge, but putting them in charge. But sometimes what happens is you have to fight. And you have to fight for it, which means you have to prove your case, which is very painful because it's always this family stuff.
Right.
So in those circumstances that you have that, what you need to do is document as much as possible. You need to make note of your son or daughter's problems, be they drugs, be they alcohol, they haven't been by to take care of the kids, those sorts of things. And you need to put pen to paper on that and put the petition. And then what you need to do is you need to have the intestinal fortitude to basically stand up and say, Mom, Dad, you don't have your act together. The kids should be coming first. Even though you're my blood,
Right.
I'm going to intervene here. And the grandparents should have the expectation of two things. One, maybe they wind up being the parents or the effective parents for the custodial parents for the children. They wind up being the ones in charge, rather.
Right.
Or maybe by their act of putting that petition together, putting pen to paper, forces those parents to be better parents so that they can actually do what they're supposed to do.
Okay.
Now, the other aspect of it is sometimes these children come into grandparents' care because the county has put them there. And I know that you had some questions about when those circumstances arrive.
Right. Like adoption.
Well, there's some.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, this is what I'm finding out that is a big hurdle for grandparents when there's drugs
Right.
and stuff involved, is that they have to put in a petition, of
Right.
course. The other individual has to be served the petition.
That's right.
And that's the problem when you have a family member on drugs. These individuals never have a place to stay.
Right.
They're always flopping at one place to
Or-
another.
right.
So what type of legal remedy does a grandparent have when they run into that situation to
Right.
be able to move forward with
When
that
the
petition?
parents are basically whereabouts unknown, what you have to do in that circumstance is you have to actually ask the court for an order allowing you to serve them by publication. Okay, in that circumstance, what you have to do is show your reasonable efforts to try and find these people. You have to say this was their last known address. We tried 3 times here. We haven't found them. We've tried their previous addresses. We talked to their friends and family members. We attempted on several occasions. And then you put that all in an affidavit, and then you ask the court for permission to serve by publication, which means basically putting it in the Daily Record or the Democratic Chronicle or whatever.
Okay.
And then if the court allows that, that's considered good service, and then it can proceed. But I think a lot of people sometimes just lose heart because that's just an added step. They think, well, it's cost money to publish stuff, and, but when you get to that sort of level here, that's what you need to do if you can't track these people down.
Right. Okay, now we were talking about the kids being in the custody of the county.
Right.
Okay, now, when there is that type of situation,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's issues where sometimes these children are adopted
Right.
by other individuals, what's the process for a grandparent who wants to be able to continue to see their grandchild, and what's the standings involved?
Well, the first thing that should happen if you're a grandparent and you're interested in having a relationship with a child who's been removed from a parent on a neglect proceeding
Right.
is to contact the county and say you want to have visitation,
Right.
that you want to have a relationship. And they'll do that because it's best for the child. And then ultimately the county will probably look to you because they're mandated to look for relative resources to see if you're a person that they should consider as a possible placement for the children long term.
Right.
So that's the normal course of events. However, sometimes those things don't work out for whatever reason. What you need to do if you have that situation where the children have been adopted out for whatever reason, what you need to do is you still have the same sort of standards.
Okay.
You have to show that you have that relationship and that relationship was good and healthy so that you have the standing. And then you have to get to the second bit, which is that it would be the best interest. And that becomes real hard after an adoption because the idea of the adoption is this is your new family now.
Right. Exactly.
But
Exactly.
sometimes it can be worth the fight. I mean, it is blood.
Right.
So,
Right.
but if it's come to that point where the kids have been adopted out, you have to look at the procedural history and see if the county has made their diligent efforts to try and find the grandparents, if the grandparents have been out of the picture. And typically they do. There are reports that come through and the judges review and the attorneys review and the attorneys for the children review showing, what these relative resources have been. I think the best thing for a grandparent to do is to show up as soon as possible in the neglect process and let their voices be heard and say to the court, I want my visitation. That way they can, when you're asking for further visitation even after the adoption, they can't say, well, where have you been? You don't have a relationship anymore. It's been 3-4 years. So the standard, the legal standard is the standard. So people need to review that. And the more that the grandparents can be involved, because it takes a long time, a real long time to terminate somebody's rights.
Right.
It isn't an overnight deal. It could take years. And in those years that this sort of mechanism is working, the grandparents should be involved. And if they do get involved, then it's unlikely that they have these visitation problems even after the rights are terminated.
Okay, supposing that the rights are terminated.
Right.
Okay, because I was reading the domestic relations law, subsection 77,
Right.
which is the statute put together for grandparents' rights. And what does a person do when when the rights of their child has been terminated to their grandchild? And here they are, the grandparent. What
Well, I think
is the standings the same? I mean, do they have to go through?
Well, I think they still have to go through the same hoops. I think that's
hoops.
what they need to do. I mean, if it was truly a situation where the grandparents didn't know anything about it, that means that they've been out of contact with their grandchildren for a long time, which makes their case even tougher. It's the issue that you have there is if the parents' rights have been terminated, the court may say that was the right thing for that to happen. The parents were a disaster. They were a train wreck.
Right.
But the grandparents, in those circumstances, if they've stepped up to the plate and they say, I want visitation, I want to have a relationship, you got to understand, most judges, most courts look at that and they say, well, can we make this work? Seeing that the parents are no longer in a position to object.
Right.
Okay, and basically you're dealing with the county or with the adoptive parents at that point. And the real question is, are there going to be any objections from either the county or the adoptive parents, whatever the case may be? And there may not be. But if you don't try, if you don't have that history, then you can guess what the outcome is going to be beforehand. You need to get involved.
Okay, see your grandchild, make sure you're documenting whatever you're doing with the grandchild.
Sure.
And that's very easy to do. I mean, if you're going to the park, the zoo, the museum,
Sure.
I mean, a camcorder in hand could easily
camcorder pictures on your
Right,
cell phone,
exactly.
you know, like, look, you know, a picture is 1,000 words. If
Yes,
if you've
exactly.
got the album, okay, there's not going to be any real controversy about it. You know, it's real tough to take a look at the photo album that shows people doing things with their grandkids and say that those things are irrelevant.
Right,
Okay,
right,
these are formative things. The
right.
family is it's a formative thing, and what they need to do is to take the pictures, write a record of what the events are, whether the kids enjoyed it or not. You know, not every child in those particular circumstances is going to be an easy child, because if they've been through the neglect process, that means the kids had a real rough run.
Right.
And what needs to happen is the grandparents have to have a lot of understanding about whatever they've gone through. Because when it comes to neglect, or even and worse yet, a termination situation, typically something really bad has happened, okay? And it's not an easy fix for the kid. So, you know, the children typically need counseling. Typically something very bad has happened. And those things need to be recognized and addressed. And I think the thing with grandparents, most of all, because they love their grandchildren, they may not necessarily like everything that happens, but what they should do is they should set aside their personal feelings and focus on what those grandkids are all about and how they develop. So, you know, that's my pearls of wisdom on that. I don't know if it was helpful.
Now, as far as great-grandparents' rights, there is none.
There's not a lot. There's not a lot of case law with regard to that. However, if you look at the situation, if they're seeking custody, okay, you have that, or a guardianship, you may have that extraordinary circumstances line, okay, which is the parents are falling down on the job. They're not getting the job done, okay. Then the grandparents are incapable of handling health, whatever reasons, and the great-grandparents then can come in and they have to prove the same sort of extraordinary standard, okay, and then it's the best interest standard after that. So things have to be pretty bad on the ground, and then the great-grandparents can petition. And typically, you know, there becomes real questions about, depending on the age of the great-grandparent, you know, what that relationship is going to be, because if it's an infant and the great-grandparents in the 80s, you know, realistically speaking, are we talking custodial situation? Are we talking just a nice visitation situation? I think that most courts want to work something out. I think most courts feel that family involvement is the best course, because the children can get something out of it. But for the further removed that relative is from either being a parent or grandparent, the more difficult it is. However, if there is a real history, say, for example, that the great-grandparent has actually been taking care of these children for 2 straight years,
Yes.
and the parents have been out of the picture, you got a lot to work with at that point.
Right.
You shouldn't be in a situation where that's discounted.
Right.
Okay, what should happen is there should be a real hard look at that relationship that was fostered over those many years, or those few years, that basically the great-grandparent was making sure that the trains ran on time, getting to school, all that sort of stuff. And I think if you are in a situation like that, what you need to be is you need to be assertive, okay? Because maybe one parent's got their act together, maybe they don't. But it's, in a lot of these circumstances, it's the open mouth that gets fed.
Right.
So if you're a great-grandparent and you've been basically the custodial person, in fact, if not in title, then you have greater sort of standing, or greater ability to have a real influence than somebody who's just coming in at the last minute. Wouldn't it be nice if I had a relationship, things like that.
Now, in reading the domestic relations law, which is skimpy, lots of case law, but really sort of skimpy when it comes to the rights of the grandparent. It seems like the courts just really doesn't have a need or a desire to really try to help the grandparent maintain the relationship with the grandchild. Because because I know a great grandparent, I mean, she took care of the grandchild, of her great grandchild for a substantial amount of time.
Right.
I mean, this child knew this great grandmother as the mother.
Right.
I mean, from the age of almost birth till it was like 2, 3 years old.
Right.
That's the person that they knew. And the judge involved seemed not to even care, treated the grandmother as if that meant nothing.
Right.
Oh, we know about that. I don't want to talk about that. That, as if it was absolutely nothing. And all she's asking for is, can I please continue some visits?
Well, the question, I don't know the particulars of that case, but the question comes back to, was there a court order that she was in charge at some point? If there was no court order that she was basically the custodial parent, or there was no guardianship order or anything like that, then what you have to do is you have to assert yourself. You have to say, look, to that particular judge, this child is very important, okay? And I was in charge for these years, and there was a real good reason for that. Be it mom was incarcerated, dad was incarcerated, somebody was on drugs, somebody was, had a massive alcohol problem, something like that. These people were unable to take care of this child.
Right, exactly.
And this child has developed certain attachments to the great-grandmother, the grandmother. And what that needs to do is, or needs to happen is, regardless of whether the parents have now miraculously come back into the picture, what that grandparent needs to do is they need to be vigilant, and they need to remain involved, and they need to not take, when the parent is being tough and says, well, you got your court order, but I'm going to do it my way. You got to file your violation petition. You got to be assertive, because here's the thing, and I think a lot of people know this, past is prologue, okay? How people handle issues in the past is going to be indicative of how they're probably going to handle problems in the future. So if you've got somebody who at one point in their lives, okay, decided that they were going to put themselves ahead of their kids, to the kids' detriment, I'm not saying that that's going to be the necessary result long term, because lots of people change their lives and all that.
Right.
But there's a greater chance that that person is going to go back to that old way.
But this individual has done this. I mean, this individual has done this time and time again and have been basically thrown out of court. Been given some skimpy, shady visits with no real focus on making sure that the great-grandmother gets to see this boy, And then when the visits don't happen, this grandmother files a petition, and, the judge's reaction is, I don't even want to hear this. Wow. It's by, So, I mean, this is what I'm seeing from the court. The court, and this is a problem with the family court, period, on every level. It seems like the individuals down there, despite the fact of the laws that protect the individuals that go down there, the laws that assist the individuals to assert whatever legal rights they may have, that it's this attitude of, I can do what I want to. I keep seeing it, even though, there's these laws.
Right.
You see this attitude constantly, I was online the other night, and I typed in organizations for grandparents' rights. Bloop, 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 all over the country.
Sure.
All these organizations, and then there's these organizations for fathers' rights all across the country. Organizations lobbying for reforms with child protective services all over the country. I mean, are all these organizations popping up and these individuals just don't have nothing better to do? Or is, do we have a problem in our court system nationally, not just locally, nationally, with this attitude of, I have the power and I'll do what I want to do?
I think what you have is you have family court as a place where not a lot of people are smiling. That's just the truth. And I think that people perceive these problems, grandparents' rights, fathers' rights, CPS reform, as real problems. And in some regards, they are real problems. The point is that these groups didn't spring from nothing.
Right.
They sprang from a feeling that the day in court that these people got wasn't a full and fair hearing. I think society and our civilization is glued together with the concept of the court is the ultimate arbiter, that the courts will be fair. I think that the family courts in particular have a huge volume of cases. Monroe County Family Court has a huge volume of cases. And I think for people who come in, and these issues are very personal and very visceral to them. This is their lives. This is the most important thing that will ever happen to them, is what happens to their children. Money, power, fame, whatever. Nothing matters more than what's going to happen to those kids, because the kids are the legacy, yeah? So when people come into court and they have all these sort of expectations, this is what life matters. This is what it's about. And it's 5 minutes in, 5 minutes out, right? You're sitting around for 2 hours and you go into court and it can be done in 5, 10 minutes, maybe it's done in 2 minutes, and you're whipsawed. You're not used to it. And what you want more than anything is for there to be an understanding by the judge of the intricacies and of people's lives, and to really take care. You may not agree with every decision that a judge makes, but you want, as a citizen, to know that you're going to get that full and fair hearing. You want to know that this judge is going to take these things seriously and that the judge is going to obey the law. And I think a lot of people, when they come into family court, they don't feel that way. And I think that's maybe a legitimate feeling.
Well, the feeling comes from not just coming into the court and not getting what they want.
Sure.
The feeling comes from going into that court and being treated a certain way, and then finding out later that you have this legal remedy that you're being denied.
Right.
That's where the issue comes from.
The other unpleasant surprise.
Yes,
right?
And then you go and you say, wow, why is this happening to me? And all of a sudden, you find yourself as this individual that wants to stand up for your rights, and no, I'm not going to take this laying down, and you start becoming this vigilant person that is going to fight for what you feel is rightfully and justly by law, your right to have. And in doing that, you wind up meeting an individual or 2 or 3 individuals that take you to a meeting, and then there's an auditorium full of people with the same issues involving some of the same similar rights that they feel was violated too.
Right.
This is the issue with the court system, and I think this is why they have all these opposing organizations that are popping up all over the country that are very dissatisfied with what they're doing. Men in the family court system have no problem with women having rights. They just want their rights too. They just want it fair.
Right.
They don't want any individual in that court, the female sitting on the other side of the courtroom, be it their wife who they're dissolving the marriage with,
Right.
girlfriend who may be the mother of their child. They want everything fair for everybody.
Right.
And what they're getting is an unfairness. And they know this. And that's where the issue lies. That's my problem with the family court system.
Well, I mean, here's
Is
the
that
issue.
you have these individuals that have taken an oath. Okay, some of them are judges. You have these referees and magistrates. You know, but you have these judges. You have these individuals that takes this oath. You have these canon rules that govern how these individuals act on the bench, and you see direct violations of some of those rules that they took an oath to obey. And I think that's the problem, and individuals are finding this out. And they're not saying, oh, I didn't get what I wanted because, you know, I didn't have proof or evidence or whatever. You screwed me. That's where the anger.
I can see where that would be the anger. I think what everyone needs to understand this, is that when you go to court, if you're going to fight, you know, over issues that are important to you, then you put everything on the table and you say, look, these things matter to me. I'm not going to back off these particular issues. That's what you need to do. Okay? You need to say, I'm going to go the distance on this. This is worth it. Okay? And then you need to understand, if you get treated unfairly in one particular court, then there is a remedy. Now, it may not be the most popular remedy on the planet, but it exists there. And it exists there because courts sometimes get things wrong. And
Exactly.
on our system here, it's from family court, you can go up to the appellate division. And those judges that are in the appellate division, they're Supreme Court judges, they've been removed from the fray. And so they look at it intellectually. They look at it not on the passions of the moment, but on the law. And that's how it should be resolved. These questions of law, these questions of fairness that people disagree with, that's the escape valve. However, the problem with that, okay, appeals are not cheap.
Exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
Appeals, quite frankly, and for attorneys to do those appeals and to do them well, and the transcripts and the records, everything has to go with the appeal so that those judges can make an informed decision and do it right. Those things cost more money than a lot of people can afford.
Exactly.
One of the things, you know, for people who are dissatisfied with the resolution that they've had after trial, and that's the thing, you really can't appeal a stipulated settlement because everybody is set on the record, they agree with it.
Right.
The only way that you can get an appeal is to actually go the distance and then have your hearing, have your trial, and if you're dissatisfied with that, then you have to bring those issues up. Most people get to that point and they say that they've had enough. They throw up their hands, they're done with the court system, it's too costly, it's too time consuming, there's too much emotion in it. They throw up their hands and they've had enough. But those few, like when you're talking about domestic relations law 77, when you say it's all case law, those cases have percolated to the top. And those things, case law is designed to flesh out what the legislature has done with regard to the statute.
Right.
So it's those cases, those case law that direct how the lower courts are supposed to see things and how they're supposed to operate. I have not met a judge who likes being overturned by the appellate division. I just haven't met that judge yet.
Right.
Because it basically is a criticism to that judge that they didn't follow the law, and the case may get remanded back so that they conform to the decision of the appellate division. There are all sorts of things that go into an appellate decision that the particular judge who rendered the underlying trial decision may not like. And there may be things that the appellate division commands be done that the particular judges may personally disagree with.
Okay,
But that's the great escape valve.
Right, but in cases like family court, You got custody visitation, which is handled by referees.
For the most part, I mean, there's some
those
judges here.
cases, okay, majority of those cases, you have your magistrates, referees.
Yep.
I mean, very quickly, because we got 5 minutes left, do those cases go to the appellate division? When a person wants an appeal in those cases, do those cases go to another judge or to the appellate division?
Well, with regard to the family court cases, they typically go to they should go to the appellate division. What you have, there's support magistrates, for example. If you disagree with a support order, you file objections, and those objections go up to the family court judge to either reject your objections or not.
Right.
And then from there, they can go to the appellate division. For the custody and visitation matters, those matters, if they're appealed, they wind up going to the appellate division. Okay, so that's the process with regard to that. And one of the things that I think your viewers need to understand is those cases that go that way have to have gone the distance. They've had to have their trials.
Right.
There was a case where I was an attorney for the child on just recently where the judge put some sanctions on one of the parties for not conducting the visitation that they were ordered to do. They were ordered to transport the child on such a day. Okay. They didn't do it.
Right.
However, the appellate division reversed that because while this judge imposed their fine on this person, and that person was represented by the public defender's office, they appealed. The judge didn't do it the right way. There was no actual contempt warnings or citations or things like that.
Okay.
And so it blew up on procedures.
Okay.
So the appellate division is watching. I mean, but like I said, in order for them to review it, you have to go the distance.
Okay. All right. Great. Great. Well, Nathan, it's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Joe.
To have you on the show today. I'm quite sure the viewing audience enjoyed all the information that you gave them. I always get questions about grandparents' rights, and I've been telling every grandparent that I've spoken to that I'm going to do a show, and maybe we'll have you back on, and because I'm probably going to get more questions.
Okay, sure.
So maybe we'll have you back on in the future. So
thank you very much.
Thank you for coming to the show.
All right.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you. That was another episode of Justice Now. Once again, I'm Joe Lewis, your host, and I want to make an announcement before I end today's show. We are planning a peaceful rally and protest in June 2011 of this year. The information to that rally and the date, time, and where it's going to be held will be given on future shows, but I want to make sure that I do make that announcement to all of you. So grandparents out there who feel that your rights has been violated in some type of way by the family court, fathers who have that same issue, mothers with your issues with Child Protective Services, remember that we will be having that rally. That'll be your opportunity to be able to have your voice heard that day. So once again, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Justice Now. I'm Joe Lewis, your host. This is coming to you from Public Access Television, the People's Network. Thanks for tuning in. Good night. Until we meet again, may God bless you.